Well, good morning, Allison.
Good morning, Jeff. How are you?
I'm doing very well, thanks. Fancy meeting you here. So we're being a little goofy, I guess, but just to give you a bit of a context, how we come to do this live broadcast this morning, it was actually we started to have a discussion this morning on this topic that we're about to present, and we realized it would probably be a lot more valuable to you if we could present this live, and you could also benefit from the insights that we're kind of discussing this morning. So the main topic actually comes from a reading I was doing this morning on Dr. Samuel Hahnemann's very, very key essay that came out in 1801. It was a very pivotal moment in Dr. Hahnemann's life and work, and it was kind of the culmination of a lot that he'd been writing for the 11 years preceding that, from 1790 till this point in 1801. He'd been doing a lot of writing, but this, as I say, a lot comes together. So the particular essay is called I forget the exact title now, but Hahnemann's title is something like "The Cure and Prevention of Scarlet Fever," which was, of course, one of the regular recurring childhood illnesses of his time. It still exists in the world, but this was particularly notable at his time. And if you really read through his essay, it's not just good advice about scarlet fever, but it really contains the most important fundamental principles about Heilkunst, and particularly when it comes to the treatment and prevention of infectious illness. So, Alison, do you want to add anything about what kind of piqued your interest as we were talking this morning? The point that jumped out to you, maybe, or should we just get into the overall structure?
Well, I think the feeling for me is that when I was studying Heilkunst over 20 years ago, I went through Hahnemann's lesser writings. And so what's amazing, I think, about our relationship is that you will restudy something, or I'll restudy something, or we'll study it for the first time, and we end up having these amazing generative conversations, sometimes while making a meal, or sitting around in the living room, or even on a walk. And so, yeah, I'm really excited that we get to revisit Hahnemann's take on the cure and prevention of epidemic diseases, including scarlet fever and cholera.
Yes, and and also you just made me think of, when you're talking about us getting into these conversations and going back to the fundamental readings and everything. Yeah, this is, I think, one thing that constantly amazes me. The nature of such principles, Hahnemann's principles of medicine, and some of the other things we study as well, some of the other areas of the dynamic system, is that's the amazing thing about truth and about principles. And some of these original scientists and authors and everything, is it's just so amazing to go back and reread it. It's like you get the nature of truth, the nature of principles, as far as one student goes, is it just keeps unfolding, right? It keeps like the truth is still the truth, but our relationship to it just keeps unfolding and expanding, and revealing new dimensions. So it's kind of like, I read this before and I got it, I got the point, but then you read it again years later and it's like, oh wow, and this connects to this idea, and we can put this idea into it, and we can do this as well. So anyways,
it's all, and there can be deep and buzz and confusion in modern day science, and I love that feeling that we're able to anchor ourselves back into the essence or the truth of the principles and underlying philosophy, really, of medicine and truth as it affects us in the present. But the anchoring of the knowledge in the past, as a physician, holds me in a sense of real grace, and knowledge, as opposed to fear that can come up with kind of modern day scourges, so to speak.
Exactly. Yeah, that's the thing. When something is true, it's true for all time. It's not just a fad or a momentary thing that people are fond of saying or thinking or whatever. But yeah, it holds true. Or the other way of saying that, it's true whether anyone knows it or not. But that's part of the exciting thing when when a Dr. Hahnemann comes along, and unearths the principles, the laws of nature, and reveals that is, he didn't invent it. He is just revealing what could be available to anyone as far as as far as seeing the truth and understanding it. But as I say, if some people say, truth is not is not a matter of democracy. You don't vote whether something is true or not, but through other rational faculties of the human mind, you recognize it or you don't. But anyways,
Right.
that's a whole other big discussion. So I'll just kind of put out anyone who is viewing this, whether you're watching live right now along with us, or if you're watching a replay later, at any time, feel free to type your question into the comment box below, and either we will answer live right along with you watching, or we'll respond to it in a later video or in another format. But yeah, do feel free. We will see comments if you are inclined to put any questions forward. So let's see. So here we are. So let me. So I apologize. This is the only slide that has a nice, pretty picture. The rest of the slides just have words, boring old words. So yeah. So the first thing we want to start with is talking about kind of like what we just alluded to. The general level, talking about Hahnemann revealing the truths and the principles of medicine, but more specifically in this presentation, we want to talk about the specific principles that he was articulating around how to use specific medicines for each and every infectious disease. So this has, I guess, always been the grand goal of any system of medicine, is try to find specific medicines that help with specific diseases. So you don't want to just always be reinventing the wheel every time, but you kind of want to know what the actual medicine is that's going to specifically either to treat or to cure a given infectious disease. And I can't remember, Alison, did you have a specific thought around that point, or is it just going to come up as we get into?
I think it'll come up as we go through.
Okay, very well. So, and just pardon me, I do have to switch screens every time I need to go switch a slide, but it just takes me a second. So yeah, so what's interesting actually in the reading I was doing this morning on Hahnemann's original essay from 1801 that we're referring to, it's the first, like if you trace back, if you read through all of Hahnemann's writings, I believe this is the very first time where he starts to talk about potentized medicines. What people normally kind of give the misnomer of a homeopathic medicine, but what we should really be calling them is potentized medicines. And of course, all the skeptics jump all over that and say, oh, the medicines aren't real and there's no atoms or molecules in it and blah 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 blah. And, of course, we could have a whole separate video just on that topic. But just my point here being that this whole business of homeopathy constantly being criticized because of the so-called problem of potentizing the medicines. Hahnemann didn't potentize medicines for that good stretch of that 11 years. If you follow all of those writings from 1790 up to this point in 1801, he was using the traditional unpotentized medicines, the crude medicines, the doses of opium and the doses of ipecac and all these conventional medicines that were being used at the time. He didn't have the idea of potentizing till at least this point 11 years later. So if anyone really wants to get into discussing the principles of homeopathy and everything, we have to start with Hahnemann's what he was very excited to discover in 1790, this principle of the law of similars. And as I say, he had nothing to do at that point with potentizing the medicines. So that, as I say, I'm just putting that in as it's kind of a side point, but it's very interesting and very important that we really need to stay on what the real point and the real principle here is. It's the principle of similars, right? So, or like cures like, as it is called. And as he says, when I was reading this 1801 essay, when he does first start to potentize the medicines in this, when he was trying to treat these Scarlet fever cases, he there was a footnote in there, and I think I can pull it up on my screen, but I'll just say it's a very interesting footnote because he kind of gives us the principle of potentizing the remedies, diluting them down, to such a fraction, and and really, really kind of making that the effective remedy. In his footnote, there's this phrase. He says something along the lines of, when you have the well-selected remedy, the medicine that matches with the disease being treated, the scarlet fever in this case, it works amazingly well. So in other words, the subtext, what he could be saying there, what the point he's getting at, is that when there's that resonance between the medicine and the disease, what we call the law of similar resonance, even if you have the tiniest amount of it, it's going to provoke a whole amazing response in a person. And actually, I think I should switch to our next slide. This really gets into the principle of resonance.
Yeah, just to go back for a second, Jeff, what you were talking about with regards to Hahnemann going from, bloodletting, cupping, and leaching to actually really exploring disease resonance was a big leap already. As what we do with regards to potentized medicine and Heilkunst came a lot later, really. So I think that's so important that what you're bringing up about having gone back and really traced the evolution of Hahnemann's understanding of disease and, medicine proper. I mean, he actually divorced disease and medicine proper for a while because he knew people were suffering and getting sicker and even dying from bloodletting, cupping, and leaching. So, for him to actually pick up a mortar and pestle and start triturating medicine really came from his love of his patients, was that he was seeing side effects. And so sometimes those side effects were causing greater illness. People were dying. And so that's the opportunity really at this juncture to anchor ourselves further into the history of medicine as it came about through Hahnemann's lens.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Thank
The
you.
other thing to note is that somebody's come in to change the gas canister. So life happens, whether you're shooting a video or doing a live broadcast, it just is what it is. So hang in there. We're almost done.
Yep. Well, there's nothing like real life when it comes to live video.
Sí, gracias.
Yeah. So there we go. So we have, as I say, it's funny. You get you can almost tell the story of Hahnemann's life and his work and everything through his footnotes. And back to that, that reference I made to 1790. The famous thing that happened in 1790 was, well, as Alison just said, when he divorced himself from medicine and he had to go to making his living by translating medical textbooks. He couldn't see himself to practice anymore, given the horrific practices of the time. He was translating, and in 1709 he was translating Cullen's Materia Medica, who was a Scottish doctor. And in this very famous footnote, I won't go into the whole long story here, but essentially that was where Hahnemann had the realization of the nature of medicine, the nature of the law of similars, and he made a very a very famous footnote basically there in 1709. That's when the law of similars became apparent to him, that was the truth. And then for this next 11 years, all his writings trace out his use of how he started to apply that. And now here we are in 1801, 11 years later, and he is, as I say, now he's really spelling it out. Now he's coming to the potentizing of the medicines. And the word we have here on this slide, the resonance, this is what he said in this footnote now in 1801, was, even when you have the tiniest amount of something, when there is that resonant relationship, it's like, it's like that expression we talk about when two human beings, when they meet and they have a good meeting, a good relationship or whatever. It reminds me of that expression, they got on like a barn on fire, right? It's like, when the one little spark can send a whole barn onto fire. But it reminds me of this idea of resonance. You don't have to pound resonance with massive amounts of a drug or whatever, many milligrams or whatever, but you do just need that one tiny little spark, and it's more than enough. It's the resonant activity happens from that.
Yeah, that happened for us.
There you go.
Remember, people said we're very unlikely individuals to fall completely head over in love, but that was the thing, is that as soon as we kind of saw each other, it was like electricity on a level that was indescribable. And
there you go.
Really that's what medicine proper is about, is that when you have the right resonance, there is an explosion or a reaction, and there is this meeting of the artificial disease and the natural disease. And there's a kind of a third energy born, which is divine, really. And so when you see all of that disease matrix dissolve, where it did in me when, I met, it's funny when two people that are resonant meet, all of a sudden they're like, oh, I have to talk about this old relationship, this, dating, oh, this person I dated was hard and awful, and all of that has to kind of fall away or ebb away for the true meeting out of resonance to happen. And so basically it's a love relationship, and that happens in the bloodstream, the endocrine system pumps up and has to get rid of all that disease matrix, those elements that contributed. The biological realm really has to step up and perform in order to create this now optimum state of health.
Mm-hmm. Yes, that's perfect. That's a great living example, and I think just about everyone can relate to that. But yeah, thank you, Alison. That really spells it out nicely. So let me see. So if we turn to our next slide, okay. So that's right. So a big part of this 1801 essay I was reading this morning from Hahnemann. A big section and this is going on, like there's many active cases of the scarlet fever in his town. That this is where the essay came from, him as a doctor treating all this at the time. One big section, he's treating what now we would call Pathak prescribing. He's treating these active cases, and he gives this great presentation. He itemizes all the different symptoms, the type of the fever, and the kind of the bright redness of the skin, and so on and so on. He's describing all these symptoms, and he describes two different kinds of cases. In one group of people, he saw such and such symptoms, and he gave one remedy for it. And then in the other group of people, he saw a kind of a different presentation of symptoms, and for those, he gave us a second medicine, a different medicine. So that was interesting. Like when it comes to epidemics, when it comes to this kind of prescribing, we will generally see that. We will see one or two, maybe three, of homeopathic medicines which apply to large groups of people. And that's, you'll see this in homeopathic communities, amongst physicians. They will often share that kind of, whether it's the latest flu going around in their community or whatever it is, they will just share that amongst their other colleagues of what remedies they're seeing are being the main match for that. So that's, as I said, that Hahnemann kind of initiated this in the way he was presenting the cases there. And what was interesting to me this morning as well, I find this really fascinating. In our modern world, modern medicine, it all becomes about defining the pathogen, the virus or the bacteria. It's like, oh, we found the virus, and of course they rush off and try to make a vaccine for that. But Hahnemann was working in a very different way. He was aware of viruses. That concept did exist at that time, but he did not get lost down that rabbit trail. He looked at the qualitative symptoms and say, this group of people had these symptoms, these had that, and he treated both of those differently when it came to the active cases, right? So yeah, as I say, he didn't get lost in this idea of a virus. That didn't distract him. He stayed on target for how does medicine actually work when you're applying the law of similars and you're going to match it based on these symptoms. So I found that really interesting to read this morning. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And yeah, I think probably it's time to go to the next slide. Oh yeah, this, Alison, do you want to talk a little bit about this? We were talking about this earlier this morning.
Well, and I think kind of more in modern terms, because I think that's what people relate to. The pathogenic disease being, like scarlet fever or cholera proper, whereas the more opportunistic diseases, for example, would be more, well, if you think about testing any individual human at this juncture for streptococcus, for example, you would find that that's a very kind of opportunistic bacterial issue sitting in the throat. So 80% people, so 80 out of 100 people are going to test positive for that opportunistic bacteria. What will happen is that when you find it in the throat, it's often asymptomatic, which is so true of many opportunistic issues. And so they can kind of come and go at any time. The pathogenic disease being kind of childhood illness, measles, chickenpox, mumps, that kind of thing. You actually see, excuse me, much more defined vason, as to speak. And I'll ask you to come in and jump in and help me define that.
Yeah, for sure, and yeah, thank you for that. And yeah, and the difference here too is kind of like you're saying. Yeah, there are these almost like these standard diseases. We especially see those in the childhood illnesses, like you just said, and it's almost like those are just simply part of the hard wiring of nature, and what humans are kind of built to go through, versus the opportunistic ones, like the example you gave with the streptococcus. We call that opportunistic more because, in a sense, it's more like, when we get an infection-like process in those cases, it's more like the body, the immune system is it's almost like it's producing that for its own purposes. It's producing that response. It's producing, the inflammation, the fever, whatever the symptoms are, more as an opportunistic way for the body to kind of do a cleanse or a cleanup operation. When we've been exposed to certain certain toxins, or certain environmental contexts, which have kind of shifted our health and our immune system. That's where we get more into the opportunistic display of the what, as I said, people all lump that together: the pathogenic, the opportunistic. Most people just say, well, infection is infection is infection. They don't understand the difference, but there's a very big difference as far as the nature of that disease and the nature of how we respond to it, and the nature of also, of course, what the remedies and stuff we get into. And actually, that's a good time to switch to the next slide. This will illustrate this point as well. The function of childhood illnesses. So back to what we've mentioned, the chickenpox, the measles, and all the standard things that children have typically gotten over the ages. There's a function, again, in these true pathogenic diseases. And excuse me, I'm just going to take a sip of water. Yeah, the function of these true pathogenic diseases is, and especially in these childhood illnesses, is at every stage of childhood growth and development, they are prone to getting some of these certain standard childhood illnesses. Again, the mumps, the chickenpox, all these things. Of course, there's all the physical symptoms. We can itemize the physical symptoms of any given childhood illness. But what we really need to keep our eye on is the ultimate direction that each of these childhood illnesses are going to go. And we see that parents report that all the time. After their child has had a given, like a true pathogenic illness, the chickenpox or whatever, when they recover from it, they will always go through some form of growth, physical growth, mental growth, emotional growth, social growth. Like they gain some new skill, some new capacity in their functioning, mind, body, spirit. At some level or other, something is going to blossom and now start to bloom in them that wasn't there before the illness. So when you get to the true pathogenic diseases, you get these very important, very necessary growth stages that are kind of spurred on by that. And then kind of in a different way, in another way, those opportunistic diseases we talked about, those have a function at another level. It's not so much the natural growth processes. You're not going to see, that childhood, natural growth process happen from that. But you are going to, like, kind of like what I was saying a minute ago, you are going to see a very specific detox or cleanup process. So it's, in a sense, it's more of a corrective rather than a positive life function that, the growth function that the child is moving towards. So that's kind of the difference, the big difference there between the pathogenic and the opportunistic, as we're talking about.
Right.
So there we have that. Now let me see. So I think that's a good example on the childhood illnesses. So the next slide, I think it's a good time to switch here. The other general topic, again, we can talk about all the immunizations that we use, in the homeopathic sense and everything. But the big distinction we also make is when it comes to someone's immune system, we make a big differentiation or distinction between the specific immunity and the general immunity. So the specific immunity are all the things we would normally think of. Of course, in the conventional medicine side, they're running off, always thinking about vaccines and everything, promoting the vaccines and researching new vaccines. So that's their example of the specific immunity. We have more Hahnemann's approach to the specific immunity. So it's kind of like a vaccine, but it is, again, using these very specific homeopathic remedies. It doesn't have any of the additives and the preservatives and all the chemicals that are in the vaccine. It's just again, that homeopathic potentization, that potentized medicine of the whatever that specific immunizing agent is for the given disease, and that produces the specific immunity. Now, what I'm contrasting that to is how that is different from the general immune system. So specific immunity is well and good. You can get chickenpox, and you can get specific immunity from the natural disease itself. That's what happens when children, when they get over chickenpox, they get over measles or whatever else, they end up not only with the growth phase, that we were talking about, but they also end up with lifelong immunity.
Right. Natural immunity.
Natural immunity, yes, specific immunity. So that's exactly what that is. Versus on the other side of this equation is something which is actually much more important, and that's the general immunity. So unlike this specific immunity, whether that's natural immunity, somebody gets the chicken pox, they get over it, they come out the other side, 10 days later, they're kind of back to factory settings, as they say, but even better, they're a new improved model. More robust, yeah. So that's all well and good, and then, or they get the natural immunity, or they get the medicinal immunity, through the specific homeopathic remedy would be ideal. Either or, you have a very short-term process. You get the immunizing agent, or you get the natural disease, and then you have the immunity. That's, as I say, a fairly short-term process. What's not a short-term process is building up someone's general immune system. So that's else. What's the shape of your diet? Are you drinking enough water? Are you doing appropriate detox, to your environment and the toxins in your environment? Are you dealing with stress properly? Are you can go on and on and on, like all the things we can do, and there's no magic bullet on that side. That's just that's just the things you do every day.
And that's what we do with sequential treatment proper, is that we're removing blockages and shocks. And people say, oh my gosh, Ali, everybody in the office is sick. Well, I'm not. Like, I'm perfectly fine. And that's because we've worked over a period of time to build the general immunity through some supplementation, but more through unblocking the life force from any impingements or engenderments of disease, whether miasmatic or environmental.
Exactly. And actually, I think you're saying is triggering me to go to the next slide. And that's where we have this very important distinction. We've kind of hinted at it here, but this distinction between medicine and regimen. So on the, so very literally, very strictly speaking, the medicine, by that we mean the homeopathic medicine, and in all the ways we use it, everything from what Alison just said of doing going through someone's timeline, removing the shocks and traumas and the blockages. We have very specific medicines for that. And likewise, we have very specific medicines for immunization. The measles immunization, the chickenpox immunization, so on and so forth. And all that is in contrast to the regimen, kind of like what I was saying earlier, everything about your diet, drinking enough water, doing enough exercise, thinking healthy thoughts, on and on and on, all the things you do for your lifestyle, the law of opposites, exactly. So yeah, on the one hand, you get the, Hahnemann's very famous discovery of his law of similars. Likewise, he contrasted that with the law of opposites. And really what he was outlining there was the difference between medicine and regimen. So that's, as I say, in a nutshell, that kind of gives us all of our really big concepts we wanted to talk about today. Alison, any kind of final last-minute thoughts or anything that's still kind of left over?
I'm just thinking of, what's occurring modern day, that people are turning a lot to regimen in order to really bolster their immune function. And yes, that has a lot of merit for sure. The other aspect, though, is to really know that terrain theory, that you can feel pretty good about the fact that you are not going to be impinged upon by a disease. In fact, it was Pasteur on his deathbed that said, "Oh, wait a second, I've made a mistake. There is no germ theory. It actually has to do much more with what Antoine Béchamp had said, which is that you have to create the conditions ripe within your body." So that means having a lot of trauma impinged upon you, a lot of time spent eating the wrong diet to create what we call islets of organization that creates the conditions ripe for disease to impinge or engender in you. The idea being that, yes, regimen is a very, very important piece in order to improve the quality of your biological realm, but also to make sure that you're unblocking from physical and emotional traumas, from former use of antibiotics in the past. We got to build back up that microbiome and, cause the individual to be at their most healthiest. The thing is that in that state, you have no concern about being engendered with a disease matrix, whether it is opportunistic or pathogenic. And so that's really the idea. I was watching Dr. Kelly Brogan yesterday, and she did an awesome job really talking about, feeling fear. Well, if you have no fear because your health is so pristine, then anything that comes up in your midst can be very easily dealt with without any concern.
Yeah, very, very nice. I'm just gonna just the last moments or so before we end this live broadcast, I'll invite you, if you're watching live, you're certainly welcome to ask any question. We can address that right now, or if we're after the fact, we will address that in the future. We will take it up one way or the other. And the one last thing that I'm being reminded of, Alison, and what you were just saying, is that meme you were showing me the other day with the two panels, and they're comparing the different philosophies about immunity and immunization and vaccination and everything, and there are two pictures of a goldfish in their in their little bowl, and on the left side, the philosophy says, the philosophy is to vaccinate the fish. And then you go to the other side, the different philosophy is to clean up the tank. So that's the difference, like what you were just saying about the terrain and kind of providing the proper conditions. So
and it's the fish in the dirty tank that want the quick, easy bullet, that they think that they're going to get something that, that's going to come from outside themselves. And I think that's key, is that we're at a place in evolution where we're realizing that there are no real magic bullets, that those magic bullets keep the fish tank, as dirty as it was before, and then is even dirtier as a result of introducing, 19 chemicals and adjuvants and all the rest of it. The idea being is that, let's clean up the fish tank and resolve the mental and emotional shocks and blocks and traumas, along with the biological realm and the ground substance of our human physiology. And then you don't have any concerns or fears of any, pathogenic or opportunistic disease whatsoever.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'll say that is probably the perfect note to end on. Thank you so much, Allison, for bringing your excitement this morning, suggesting we do this. I think a lot of people will benefit just from getting some of the basic concepts cemented properly and understanding things properly.
And thank you for your patience as we had the gas canister for our apartment changed out. We didn't expect them arriving at that exact time with the landlord. And also the sun moving around, which is kind of glorious for me. But the unexpected natural happen can occur during live broadcasts. So there you have it.
Well, I think that's what makes
Jeff.
it fun. So there we are. So, okay, well, see you all soon. And again, even if you watch after the fact, you can type your questions in the comment box below, and we will certainly pick them up and address them in a future broadcast. Okay, awesome. Have a good day, everyone.
Adios.